Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What do you do if a house you've never seen before simply appears on the other side of your back fence one morning? Is the human race unknowingly serving an alien race? How do you get your occult crazy friends to stop using Ouija boards?
Hello, and welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. And I'm Ben, and those far-ranging questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. So today we have an open line show. Well, technically it's evening. So we have no guest. And as far as emails go, please know that any time is a good time to call in, because all we have is emails to talk about. Locally or from Canada, the numbers tonight are 401-766-1240, and it's 800-449-1240 for anywhere else in the United States. So from locally or in Canada, the number is 401-766-1240, or anywhere else in the United States, the number is 800-449-1240. But first, it is time again for a weekly paranormal contest. So last week's question was, what race of beings are sometimes known as the lordly ones?
The lordly ones. And also, just for the record, this is our 333rd show. You got to make sure we get that in there. All right, so John Gauthier, or Gauthier, or however you want to pronounce it from around here, from Rentham, Massachusetts, was the first one to get that one right. In European folklore, the little people, or fairies, were sometimes known as the lordly ones. Now, this indicates something that we miss in our shallow modern understanding of our own ancestors' folklore, at least if our ancestors came from Europe. Originally, the fairies, as we call them, weren't thought of as little tiny people with wings, dancing around mushrooms at night. They were what appears to be a noble, if you will, alien race who came to Earth after being exiled from somewhere else by a far less noble race than they. We'll talk more about that on next week's show when we have a very distinguished guest on the subject.
No, I was wondering where the wings came from. It's not like...
Yeah, what are you going to do? That's
human nature to put wings on things. All right, so this week's question is, in what town and state would you find the ghost of Resurrection Mary? And get that right, and win a copy of Footsteps in the Attic, my dad's most popular book.
Yes, I was going to give you away as the prize this week.
Yes. Ship me in a crate, like cartoon style over here.
Spent the night in a crate. Anyway, the phone numbers again this evening, locally or from Canada, or anywhere else for that matter, 401-766-1240, or from anywhere in the USA, 800-449-1240, or you can write us during the week. We are not monitoring email right now, unfortunately, but you can monitor us during the week at paul@behindtheparanormal.com or ben@behindtheparanormal.com if you wish to answer our question, and no one has done so before the end of the show. Now to our emails. Okay. We have a number of very... I never cease to be impressed by the... intelligence and thoughtfulness of our listeners. I'm very impressed. That's what this show is supposed to be for, and I like to think this means we're kind of doing our job. Anyway, it's a question about many worlds, and it's from Meg S. in Windsor, Ontario.
Okay, so Meg writes to us tonight. Hi, Paul and Ben. I love listening to you two, especially when you get going on other worlds. My daughter wants to know if Harry Potter's world is real. I do too, especially when it comes to places like Weasley's kitchen, where the pots and pans wash themselves.
Well, I'd like to know that myself, Meg. Actually, well, strictly speaking, as we've said several times on the show before, the whole point that is made often in the multiple worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is a generally accepted physical principle in science, although it is interpreted in many, many different ways, that all things that can possibly exist do exist in one or more different worlds. And we've often said on the show, I remember we did our Halloween show, we tried to come up with something interesting and unusual for that, naturally.
The Great Pumpkin.
And we're talking about the Great Pumpkin. Well, strictly speaking, unless the Great Pumpkin or some creature like that, some equivalent, exists somewhere or somewhen in all these different alternate worlds, then Charles Schulz, the cartoonist for the Peanuts cartoons, never would have thought of it. Because at some point he, in one of his lives, is experiencing this creature, and it comes through because we're all one big mind, so to speak, certainly even among these different worlds. So, yeah, I think it's entirely possible that there are worlds in which, and the critical factor here is that many physicists believe, and will state that it's a fact that among these different worlds there can be different laws of physics, so that in some worlds you might be able to fly, right? Although those worlds would probably be very rare. In other worlds, there would be all sorts of creatures such as you would not recognize, or camels might have two heads, or anything that is conceivable, anything that is possible under any number of physical laws or scenarios does exist somewhere or someone in the multiverse. So sure, there probably is a world, and maybe many worlds, in which people can give a word of command and the pots and pans wash themselves. Unfortunately, this is not one of those, as far as I know. Although, these worlds can mix. People can call upon, this is what shamans do, call upon the powers of the worlds, and even maybe even the physical characteristics of them, and bring them into ours for things that we need. There is, I don't know if this is true, we should check this out, Ben, that I don't know which, it's in the Wiccan religion this man has talked about, but he has perfected this technique to the point where he doesn't even have to do any kind of spells, he doesn't have to do any kind of words, he just sort of projects his will at something and it will occur. Supposedly he lives in Scotland, and he's very old and very he's very careful about his time, very careful about who he talks to. He will do counseling and training sometimes, but he's very little known, and this is just what I heard. I don't know if any such person exists. However, you know of people in the mountains of China.
Oh yeah, well there aren't a lot. I mean, there's an ancient form of martial arts in ancient China that it still sort of remains today, but it's not like the true thing. If anyone's seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it's like that, except way more intense and actually existed. I mean, it may seem kind of ridiculous. Like
There's the Wudun discipline. I heard about that when I was in martial arts training in the military. Strangely enough.
Yeah,
many years ago.
It may seem like oh well, people can't fly around and stuff. All these people were so.
Well, I never saw it. I heard things like, you wouldn't believe the things you hear, but but again,
China was a weird.
All things are possible.
Well, ancient China was an interesting place.
Sure was.
There was all sorts of they were very, very, they have a different way of thinking than we do, obviously. Or they did. Well, actually, everyone had a different way of thinking, if you look back at
you can argue that they had to teach our ancestors how to wear pants.
Yeah, true. And then came back over there and didn't have a decent pair of pantaloons.
Well, anyway. Okay, so I think that's a long answer to a short question. I think, yes, Meg, it's entirely possible. You can tell your daughter that that worlds like Harry Potter certainly must exist.
But to the untrained mind, imagine how, terrifying that would be.
That's an excellent point. There's a very thin line between horror and humor. And I think that the greatest, and I think almost Lovecraft talked about this, I think in his essay, Supernatural Horror in Literature, very little known, but it was a brilliant essay. And in that he kind of touched on the point that the greatest terror can be evoked in us by some kind of disjointedness in time and space. Like if we got up in the morning and the sun was rising in the west instead of the east, or the birds flew upside down or something. I mean, it would that would be, our sense of security would be gone. Those are the most basic things that we experience. Pretty much. And then things in our own lives, or, you wake up and there's somebody lying in the bed next to you never saw before. And that's pretty, there can be, all sorts of things that you take for granted that can break down if time and space break down. And that is what the paranormal seems to be, and why it scares people. Because
it's like the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disjointedness in time and space. Things are there that shouldn't be there, didn't he die last week? Or, what's that, as we're going to see shortly in one of the emails, what's that house doing there? I've lived here for 20 years and I've never seen that house before. What the heck is this?
Well, we're creatures of habit, so we're used to things being in some sort of a routine. Even the people who are like, well, I don't like routine, I try to do things differently. It's like, well, no matter what, you still have a routine that you stick to every day.
Yeah.
And if that little routine is messed up a little bit, you get ridiculously anxious.
Well, when I was the one who was home with you and your brother, because I was the writer, I worked at home, and you pretty much spent your days with me when you were growing up. And I was always told, of course, that routine and ritual are two of the most important factors for security in a human life. And I don't know what the results were, but I always tried to give you an orderly life and this sort of thing, and security, despite all the craziness that I was involved with here. But anyway, the point being that this apparently is what horror is about, is the things we just aren't used to. So again, that's this world of Harry Potter might be horrifying to some people, or it might be great to some others.
It sounds fun in theory, but I feel like it would be utterly terrifying.
Yeah, very possible. Very good and astute point. Okay, here's one. This is from Barry in Rentham, Massachusetts, and Barry would like to know.
Okay, so Barry writes to us. I've heard you talk several times on the show about churches that are having paranormal issues. You also talk about the power of religious items, sacred names against parasites. So can churches really be haunted?
That's a good question. It has come up before. I haven't run into really haunted churches as such. Of course, it depends what's doing the haunting. That's and what do you mean by haunting? Our idea of a haunting is you've got overlapping parallel realities, and you've got stuff impinging from an alien reality onto our own, or a reality that is at least not necessarily alien, but is not our own, impinging upon our own at that point. I made some notes here on this. One of the more interesting examples of a church that people might think would have been haunted was what is considered one of the scariest photographs ever taken of a ghost. All right, quote-unquote ghost. And this was taken in 1963 by the rector of a church in Newby, North Yorkshire, England. And it's a very famous picture. Actually, I think we may or may not have it on our website, but it's a monk-like figure. He was taking the priest was taking a picture of the altar, and there's sort of a very tall, 8 or 9 foot tall monk-like figure, very thin, in a cowl and robes, with a what appears to be a cloth mask over its face with eye holes cut in it. And it has been tested 30 million times, well, not that many, but a lot, by people who are supposedly photo experts and this sort of thing, and everyone has agreed that, at least so far, that it is not a double exposure, it is not any kind of fakery involved here, because this is before Photoshop, it's before digital photography, and there appears to be no, the actual negative has been studied, and there appears to be no trickery involved. So, now, the reason I bring that up is because it was interesting. This church had no history whatsoever I have ever been able to find out about of any kind of haunting problems. Nothing happened after this photograph was taken either. The rector was very concerned, but he didn't really know what to do. He was careful who he showed it to. But in other words, did that mean the place was quote-unquote haunted? Perhaps not. As a matter of fact, I happen to have had Ben and I both sort of rubbing elbows with a certain species from, I suppose, one of our parallel neighbors, and Ben early on started to call them the clerics. This is a picture of a cleric, or whatever that race may be. They appear to be very benign, very, very tall, humanoid-type creatures from a close parallel reality that one runs into in paranormal research, if one knows what one is looking for. And with the mask over the face, I came to know, was something they do when they are at prayer. They pull a mask over their face as a sign of humility, and they wear. So I mean, they are almost like monks, and we have been. I might go so far as to say assisted in several cases by, or at least one particular that Ben was involved with, by one of these rather benign and neighborly beings, but still very quiet. So, I mean, that's what I saw when I looked at that picture. Most people are terrified. What a weird-looking creature. You know?
Yeah, true. Well, you can't just... Well,
judge a ghost by its collar. I guess.
Yeah,
they're not
exactly.
ghosts. I mean, they're perfectly physical beings.
Yeah.
That's the thing with this, and that a lot of people can't get by, is that we're not dealing with spirit worlds here or non-corporeal entities, at least not in most cases in our experience. And as I said, I've been at this for 42 years, and what I'm running into are perfectly physical beings from worlds that happen to overlap. And that seems to be how the universe is constructed. So to answer Barry's question, I have never run into an actual haunted church as such. One hopes that there is enough positive energy in any religious community, because that's not always true, to prevent parasitical or negative entities from operating there. But then again, I hate to say this, especially after all the years I spent in the seminary and a lot of happy memories from that, but there is much evil that I have seen in churches and never outside of. I don't mean just churches, but any religious group at all. I don't want to name it outright, but there are several religious groups who are violent. And very much involved with hatred of other groups and other people who don't believe the way they do. There are a number of them, unfortunately, and so I don't need to say any more about that. But
he mentions that, like, well, if religious symbols help fight against evil, well, they're symbols. I mean, that you can. It depends on how you use them. I mean, if you write a bunch of letters on a page, because letters are symbols. Mm-hmm. You could just write like gobbledygook. I mean, it's all depends on how you use it.
Well, it is how you use it, and it depends on your own belief as well.
Yeah.
And I've said several times in talking about this sort of thing that religious symbols really work best if you believe in them. Now, it's interesting that one that does seem to be kind of universal is holy water. And this, of course, is for those who don't know, is water that is literally blessed in the midst of generally a Christian community, but there's pagan holy water too.
Well, yeah, Hindus have the holy river.
The Ganges.
Yeah, the Ganges.
Yeah. Well, at Abydos in Egypt is the temple of Isis, where people have been known to be healed of cancer by bathing in the waters of the Assyrian.
Well, one could make an argument too that besides that it's fundamental to life. I mean, we're all made up of water, but then one could point at like an ancient philosopher like Thales or something, because he said the primary element of all things is water.
He was right.
Yeah,
hydrogen and oxygen, especially hydrogen. That's
he meant a symbolic sense, but yeah.
Yeah, well, he was more right than he thought.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I love that. People who say these things, they turn out to be brilliantly right and didn't even know it. Well, I kind of always had a soft spot for Thales anyway, the Greek philosopher. But in any case, holy water does seem, when it is, I know how the Orthodox do it. You have the entire community surrounds this huge vat of water, and it's blessed, and presumably, and hopefully, certainly the whole positive energy of love and good things goes into this, and it's powerful stuff. So that is one of the few, it's generally associated with Christianity, but that's one of the few, if you want to call sacramentals or symbols that I will recommend to anybody, regardless of their own religious background, in a case, and it really works a lot.
You know what? Also, they have holy salt.
That's right.
I've never heard of that until I started dating a Catholic girl. Never heard of holy salt. I thought that was the weird. I was like, wow.
Well, it's not used very very commonly.
Yeah. I was like, wow, holy salt. Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The salt of the earth. Haha, dude.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So, but still, your own faith is really important. Then people say, well, what do you mean the cross doesn't have any? I didn't say the cross doesn't have any power. I said there's more power when you believe in it, or the Quran, or the Bible, or anything, the Torah, anything, the scroll, anything you want to use. I've seen children protected by teddy bears. They kind of believe in, when there have been, unfortunately, parasitical entities operating in their home or something like that. So it's a matter of something in theology that is known as synergy, synergy, which is the working together of people and God. And this creates a pretty good partnership, especially when people work together. and then together work with God, as in the holy water thing. A small example, but I'm speaking from, as I say, 42 years of experience and seeing what works and what doesn't. So I would at the same time hesitate to bring, I suppose, crosses into a Jewish or Muslim or Hindu household, because it doesn't mean that much to them. So the faith is better, and their own power to resist negative entities is best called upon by using symbols that mean more to them and to their own faith. So you get my point. But it is interesting about the holy water thing. People working together and infusing this basic element of the universe, especially hydrogen, with the power of love. You can draw all sorts of amazing, wonderful physical and spiritual and philosophical concepts from that. I think.
Well, water is also a very powerful thing, even if you're not religious. I mean, who was it? He was this, I don't know if you call him psychic, but he would look into the water and, see, all these things in the water, and he'd help solve murder cases.
Oh, that was a fellow right around here.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who it was.
I wish I could remember. He's very well known. Well, if he's listening, I do apologize. I don't remember your name. I believe he's retired now. But he told me, he said, it's funny that we talk about water, because he very often would be attempting to help the police with cases and stand on the bridge over the Blackstone River, and he would feel more energy and more knowledge and this sort of thing, because water does what? It conducts electromagnetic energy, which can do things to space-time.
Yeah. And
you can perhaps see across boundaries more easily if you're around water. There are interesting traditions about water when it comes to paranormal entities. Ghosts cannot cross water. Well, that's not really true, but there may be a folk belief in that.
Neither could witches.
And witches supposedly cannot cross water.
Witches cannot cross water.
Yeah, I'm sure plenty of Wiccans who go to work over bridges every day.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's an old folk belief. All the old folk beliefs are based on some grain of truth somewhere along the line. And that could have been just somebody noticing, well, I feel more protected when I'm near water. On the other hand, we've had cases. Now, you weren't involved in this one over here in the town of Gloucester, Rhode Island, Ben, but on Lake, I believe it was Lake Washington there was a little peninsula that came out into the lake, and they had all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And it almost reminded me of the house in Connecticut that we've been dealing with for so many years, with sort of a multiversal crossroads. They would see all these things and entities and the seemingly unrelated things that just would occur there.
It's a very fun case.
Oh yeah, exactly. So that apparently was what happened there. So anyway, that's just dealing with our church question here. I've never really encountered a sort of haunted church in that sense. Although people will say, because abandoned churches or monasteries very often have strange things going on. I remember that there are several cases in Europe where you can still hear monks singing. For example, sometimes on a different level that used to be there like in the 12th century, but not today.
Yeah.
But again, this all seems to be multiversal. World boundaries crossing, and the monks are still there in the 12th century actually singing, and you can hear it in the 21st.
Or like we had a guest on who was talking about ley lines and things like that, and was saying some ancient churches and monasteries were built on sites of power. They'd knock down pagan stuff and just put churches there.
That's true.
The
that was
chapel.
Certain places, and we've dealt with that question. What makes some place holy? What makes it sacred? What might make it sacred than somewhere else? And there are a lot of devotees of the ley line theory, which is essentially energy lines, electromagnetic, presumably crisscrossing the earth like a net. And they somehow, if you build on these lines or where they cross, that is where it's considered a sacred place, because if you stand there, you yourself are energized by these, and you can see across world boundaries, and you get to know certain stuff like this. So, okay, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com in New England's beautiful Blackstone Valley.
Hi, I'm Connie Lamond, inviting you to listen to C'est la vie, that's life, with short stories about local people. Could be your neighbor, your relative. Tune in on Fridays at 9:05 a.m. and Saturdays at 8 a.m. I'll let you guess who the person is.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
right, we wanted to tell you about the wonderful Amazon Kindle devices that are available now for e-reading. And, of course, e-reading is just like regular reading, except you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money on gas or go to an expensive bookstore to buy actual printed books. You have the device in your hand, and you literally download up to over 1 million books, games, movies, newspapers, magazines, and you have them right in your hand. It's great, especially for vacations. And, of course, as we're now approaching summer, believe it or not, take it with you. It's great. The Kindle itself is only $79 at many places, including Staples. And the Kindle Fire, which is particularly marvelous, it's all color, and you can download all sorts of marvelous games and other activities on this. It's $199, and I understand that's going to be coming down pretty soon, too. So in any case, check it out. It's really it's a very good investment. It's a marvelous gift, and it certainly will pay for itself over the long run. Amazon Kindle and Amazon Kindle Fire. And, of course, as I always say, you can also get 4 of my books on these devices, Faces at the Window, Footsteps in the Attic, Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny, and a non-paranormal title, Rhode Island, A Genial History. For our local audience, certainly might be interested in that, used in several school districts in Rhode Island and written with my good friend Glenn Laxton, formerly of Channel 12 in Providence. So check it out, Amazon Kindle Fire. Okay, let's get back to our emails now. I will, actually, this is a report from one of our show reporters, a very, very dear friend of ours, Donna from Connecticut, who handles southern New England for us, just keeping up on what's going on paranormally, and also happens to live in a house that is the site of one of the most remarkable cases that I have ever worked on, and is, as I say, one of these Grand Central Station areas of the paranormal, or of the multiverse, where all sorts of things can happen, all sorts of seemingly unrelated creatures are seen, and all sorts of activities take place. And there's always something new to report. This is from Donna, who just wrote to us on Saturday about this, and it says, just a quick update. Last night my daughter was downstairs in her living room reading by the staircase. My grandson had gone to bed, and she heard the chair move across the floor in the upstairs hallway. She yelled, this is a 1783 farmhouse, by the way, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, but the family has lived there for many generations. Anyway, she yelled up for him to go back to bed. He didn't answer, so she listened, and it was quiet again. In a few more moments, she heard heavy footsteps going down the hall. She looked up and saw a person leaning over, looking down at her. She said it was gray, with no hair, and had long arms and fingers, which were visible when it was leaning over the edge of the rail. It had the shape of a face, but it was smooth with no features. It appeared to have something hanging off its arms, shoulders, and fingers that looked like gray rags. She jumped up and ran into her bedroom because she was scared, then carefully went to bed and left all the upstairs lights on. Now, there's more, but this is very interesting to us because this case involves a certain amount of UFO activity. It started with quote-unquote ghosts and all this interplay between all these words in about 2005 when they called in Ben and I on this. And then all of a sudden, later on, it began to sort of hook up with other phenomena in this area. And this is the way we approach the paranormal. All these things seem to be connected. You don't have stuff going on in one house and then maybe in another house something entirely different. It's all connected and all has to do with these energies in this area. So when I hear about a gray being sort of looking over the stairs and then down onto people, and everybody in this house has seen or has felt something of this kind going on, I begin to think, well, the gray color, the most commonly reported alien being, supposedly from other planets, I don't know if that's true or not, from the UFO community is something that looks just like this, something gray, although they usually have some sort of face, but this is it just kind of struck me because they have seen the gray alien type of figure in this house, and of course there's a lot of UFO activity in the area, and Ben and I have been researching all that and have come up with some pretty interesting conclusions and had some interesting experiences in that vicinity. We do hope to have a town hall meeting in that area, too, to check up on what is going on with the other residents, whom we understand are having interesting experiences as well. So anyway, Donna continues, my dogs keep running to the front door and barking like crazy, but no one is there, not even on the road. This is a pretty rural area. I was sitting on the edge of my bed earlier, and a dark gray block, about 4 inches by 1 inch rectangle in shape, came out of the wall. This is typical in this house. went down toward the floor, came back up, went back down, and came back up, and went through the opposite wall. It moved pretty fast, zigzag pattern. Just thought I'd keep you up to date. Well, thank you, Don. It's always an interesting experience to receive your thing. And again, there are photographs of these things in many cases. We ourselves have had a lot of interesting experiences there. We got a video of one of the weirdest creatures I ever saw coming down out of a tree. And that's online at newenglandghosts.com under the Ghosts of Connecticut page. So anyway, thank you, Donna, for that. And we are continuing on that case, and we will keep you updated, you being the radio audience. Okay.
I'll have to get back there soon.
Yeah, we will be. And we were trying to set up one. I don't know. There seems to be some kind of, I don't know. There's a lot of government activity in that area, and I don't know. We're having trouble setting up a meeting, which is very strange because we're having one in Vermont and one in England, and some others we're working on too. But this particular one seems to be a kind of a hard nut to crack. So anyway, here's a question from Harry M. in Boston. It has to do with books.
Almost said it.
I know, I didn't say it.
Good check. Good call on that one. All right, so Harry writes to us. Hi, Paul and Ben. I love the show and never miss it. Thank you for the free podcasts. Many shows charge for their podcasts, and many people can't afford to pay. That's understandable.
No, it's our pleasure to do that.
Yeah. Yes. I hate when people make me pay for stuff. Anyway, I have a question, especially for you, Paul. I am an avid reader, especially when it comes to unusual books on paranormal subjects, fiction, and nonfiction. I have, of course, read all your books. I was wondering if you ever read Little Big by John Crowley or Mythigo Wood by Robert Holdstock, both published in the 1980s. I would love to hear your ideas about these books reflect the multiverse, about how these books reflect the multiverse.
Well, that's a great question, Harry, and I appreciate it because, as it happens, Little Big by John Crowley is one of my favorite books. And these are both works of fiction. And Mythigo Wood, at least that's how I pronounce it. I don't know how you really want that, by Robert Holdstock. They are very different books, but they can be related, I suppose, to the multiverse idea. And a lot of people, we actually had one of our contest questions was where was the idea of the multiverse, or where was the word multiverse first used? And a lot of people answered they thought I had coined that word. That's not true at all. It was first used in 1895 by Henry James, or one of the great authors of that time.
Yes.
And so it's not my term and it's not my idea. It's just what I have seen over 4 decades or more working with this as the best possible explanation, far better than the usual superstition and spiritualist stuff that is generally used to explain these things. And Ben having come in with me now, naturally he's a little biased because he grew up hearing my lectures 300 or 400 times, but he will concur that this is the best explanation that we've seen for these.
Well, thanks to philosophy, I've become a little bit more skeptical, if you will.
Yes.
So, well, I wouldn't say skeptical. I'd say more considerate of other ideas.
Yeah, good. Yeah, always. That's one thing philosophy is supposed to do, is give you the advantage, or sometimes in this world, a disadvantage of seeing all the different sides of an argument. Maybe more politicians should do that. Anyway, these are great books. I would recommend them. John Crowley is a British author, and Little Big is the story of, it's really unusual, it's the story of a young man named Smokey Barnable, as I recall. And I've read this book several times.
Smokey Barnable.
Smokey Barnable. Yeah, everybody in the book has nature names. And he leaves the city, and this the way it's written, it seems like, it's one of these books where you really can't place what time and place it is set in. And but it strikes me as sort of like New York City, and he leaves and literally has to walk out into the countryside to marry his wife-to-be, who's a member of a very, very unusual family. And this family seems to be in touch with a lot of nifty things in nature. The multiverse idea comes in where you have, and everybody around this estate and in the neighborhood of this estate seems to have nature names. You have the Hill family, the Weed family, the Dales, and this and that. And the particular woman involved is quite interesting. They seem to have contact with what might be called little people. There are all sorts of interesting photographs. And Smokey is a little bit dense, I think, here. And it takes him a while to sort of get all this. And it does follow the story of their marriage all the way through many years. And interestingly enough, the background is sort of an economic collapse in America, and things are pretty bad at the end. They don't even have electric lights. But they still have this wonderful old house and this tremendous area where they live. And in the end, they do enter a parallel world. I don't want to give the plot away, but Smokey dies in the process. And, of course, it brings in some of our ideas of death and stuff. So I don't know if Crowley's ever read anything. But probably not. He wrote in the 80s, and I was, not too prominent in those days. So in any case, that's the story of that. And Mathago Wood is a very interesting story as well, and that has to do with an English, also in an English estate, rather, which is very close to an enchanted woodland area in which all sorts of myths seem to come to life. If you go in there, I know one of them is, I believe it's pronounced Cuchulainn, the great ancient Irish warrior hero who comes down in many folk tales. And there are also a number of Romans and all the stuff from European folklore, the wild hunt and all sorts of gods and things. And if you get too close to this, you kind of get burned. And the trouble with one of the brothers in the household is that he falls in love with a beautiful queen or princess whose name escapes me, but all sorts of multiversal complications result. So these are great books, and I thank you, Harry, for bringing these up, because I really like these books myself. And the whole multiverse idea and parallel worlds are reflected in many, many aspects of literature and nonfiction as well today. So it's not just our idea, but thanks for bringing that up. It's an interesting question. Okay, now we have... Oh, it's a question on, I guess, Lovecraft from Gary. Ben is sort of the identity cop. We have a
well, they ask not to be...
Well, no. Well, sometimes, I don't know, maybe the form should be reset. Because sometimes people... we have a form on our website, behindtheparanormal.com, where you can ask these questions, and most people use that form. And it has a spot where you can say, please, use my full name or don't. Well, I will just say Gary from Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay. Okay, whatever. So Gary writes, I am a fan of yours and a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft. I was amazed to hear you mention that he was a cousin of yours and Ben's. Does the multiverse theory run in your family? Much of Lovecraft's work reminded me of it. Also, there are all kinds of books today that claim Lovecraft possessed all kinds of secrets about reality and ancient gods that he put into his stories. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't think much of it, actually. And we're not that closely related to Lovecraft. We had a common ancestor in the late 1700s or something, and so we're like fifth cousins or something. But my mother, Ben's grandmother, said that my father, indicated at least that my father corresponded with Lovecraft at some point in the 1920s or early 30s as a fan. Probably had no idea there was any family relationship. And that would be something. I have really tried to find any of those letters, because Lovecraft was one of the most famous, epistolarians in American history.
Yeah, I think that's the right word.
Letter writers. And his letters have been published in a series of, I believe it's 5 books.
The epistles of Lovecraft.
Yeah, so he wrote far more letters. Had he written fewer letters, he might have been able to write more stories, but he was certainly native of Providence, Rhode Island, and one of the greatest horror story and fantasy writers of the 20th century, often equated with Edgar Allan Poe, sort of the 20th century.
He doesn't get the credit he deserves, I don't think. But
he's been called one of the 10 greatest writers of all time. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but nevertheless, I always love his work. And,
he is related to us, and we're pretty weird. So I think he's just pretty eccentric.
Well, yeah, true. Actually, Lovecraft was an avowed atheist who claims he didn't believe in anything except materialism. That was not an unusual position in those days. He lived from 1890 to 1937. But
thanks, René Descartes.
What?
I'm blaming René Descartes.
Oh, yeah, we tend to do that. But he didn't believe in any of the things he was writing about. He sort of just enjoyed. He always said he wrote for himself. He didn't try to please an audience, although he was published in a number of magazines. Matter of fact, your grandfather had a complete collection of Weird Tales magazine that Grandma threw out in the 1950s. Oh, I can imagine how much that would be worth today. Anyway, Lovecraft was published in that.
It's like someone having the Dead Sea Scrolls in their living room. Oh, we need to clean this out.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, anyway, Grandma had her opinions. So anyway, the whole idea of Lovecraft as a great writer is certainly well fixed in American literature in one way or another. But he simply, I can't believe that he believed any of the things he was writing. He does refer to at one point to an alien race that walked, matter of fact, the way he put it, between worlds. All right, and he might have meant planets, but he did pioneer in fiction a lot of the ideas that might come up in speculation about the multiverse.
Yeah,
today.
like the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
Sure, yeah, that's one of the lesser known stories, but certainly one that kind of carries you along through various worlds. And this is something that he was familiar, I know, with quantum mechanics because he mentions it in his letters. But whether he actually believed in any of this, I don't know. There's much literature today about a book that he used to make up spooky sounding books to put in his own stories, like the Necronomicon or the Necronomicon, depending on how you pronounce it.
The Necronomicon.
You know, of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred or something. And because he just made this stuff up. Abdul al-Hazred was a childhood nickname that his grandfather gave him. Because he had an Arab stage where he liked to dress up and play at the Arabian Nights and all this business. So I mean, these are all things that came from his own past and in jokes and things like this. So I can't believe that he actually believed any of this stuff, particularly being an avowed materialist. So I hate to disappoint you, Gary, but I just don't think that any of these books were real. He didn't know any particular secrets. He just really had a great time writing these stories, and he was known to his friends as sort of a really great fellow, very quiet, very scholarly and brilliant, but self-taught, without the intellectual discipline of a classroom or anything like this. But nevertheless, I just don't think that he believed actually any of this stuff. But good question, because a lot of people think that he did. Okay, we have time for one or two.
Well, as cool as that would be, I mean.
No, maybe. But look at, I don't know. Look at some of the stuff we run into. I often wonder. Half of his characters end up in mental asylums, and because they learn too much about the nature of reality.
Yes,
sometimes I
Arkham
wonder.
Asylum over here.
Arkham Asylum, yeah, exactly. The term Arkham, the town in Massachusetts, it sometimes comes up even on television today. That's a town Lovecraft invented.
It's also in Batman too.
Really?
Yeah, okay. It's a big Batman thing.
It's amazing where Lovecraft's influence reaches at the point. So. All right, well, here's one from, Molly, I won't give her last name, in Cimarron, New Mexico.
Okay, so Molly writes to us. Hi, Paul and Ben. Can you explain again what tulips or tulpas are? I'm sorry.
Tulips?
Sorry, I read
Wrong show. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I know you're tired.
I know, it's Monday. So.
Well, I'm 200 years older than you are.
What tulips are, and could they take the form of... I said tulips again. Oh.
Uh-oh.
Okay, tulpas.
Once.
Tulpas. All right, tulpas. What tulpas, there we go, tulpas are. And could they take the form of Bigfoot, giant birds, or some of the other monsters we hear about?
Okay, well, compared with daffodils and geraniums, I would say... Okay, sorry.
It's going to go on the rest of the show.
Okay, a running gag. Okay, that's a very, very good question, Molly. Because now, what a tulpa is generally is thought to be, so to speak, is a thought projection created by intense concentration by a very powerful shaman or group of people. This is generally thought to be a thought form, as one way we put it in the West, and it is part of the spirituality of, among others, the Tibetan Buddhists. They, however, the monks there are very careful, however, when they do this, it's considered an act of discipline, spiritual discipline to do it, but they often find that the thing that is created cannot be put back in the box, so to speak. So it takes on a life of its own. I was actually familiar with a group of college students in Ontario, Canada, who literally got together and, against the better judgment of a friend of mine, formed a group, came up with a personality, wrote it down, just made the whole thing up, and set about to create an entity, a ghost, if you will. And it got to the point where it was a female ghost. They actually got photographs of it. There's one photograph of it sort of reclining on the ground and sort of looking at the camera. And this gets really weird. So it makes you wonder again about the nature of ghosts. What I think was happening is they're not creating anything except a dinner bell for parasitical entities or negative entities to come running and feed off the energy and to be whatever you want it to be until, of course, it starts to take over. And that's often the complaint of people who are involved with these tulpas spiritually is that, and it's something we certainly do not recommend, that the things become powerful and will literally be uncontrollable. Now, they often take the forms of animals, and we have seen in a number of cases, or I've seen in a number of cases, particularly I'm thinking back to the 1970s, there was one case in Bristol, Connecticut, where they would see red eyes looking in their window or out from under furniture, and the growling as though of some kind of wolf or bear or other animal, and animals sort of featured in this. And I said, oh, do you wonder if these could be tulpas, because the intense energy in the house might have taken the form of that sort of negative entity. So I think that that's entirely possible. But now Molly here takes the question a step further with the idea, could these, what are known as cryptids, unclassified animals, of the famous kind, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, whatever these things are, could actually be tulpas? That's a good question. And I mean, we've often thought that now we're not big researchers in that field in particular. We're in touch with a lot of people who are. We have a lot of guests who are. We know people who've chased Bigfoot and giant birds and all these things, Monster Quest and all this business. And they are open to the idea that these are multiversal creatures. They might pop in and out of through world boundaries that happen to be crossing ours at any point, at certain points, and that's why none of them has been found, particularly bodies or this sort of thing, but only remnants, hair, and some evidence of these things have been found. So it is possible that some of these could be not necessarily multiversal creatures, but I don't see any reason why they couldn't be tulpas as well. But you'd have to have an energy source. And many of these cryptids are not in any particular area where it's a large area where you have a lot of human habitation, or groups, concentrating on them to create tulpas, or feeding energy into certain areas where they might be created. Although it is theoretically possible. We still have to get in touch with a fellow in Pennsylvania who has told us that he is friendly with a family of Bigfoots, Big Feet, whatever, and he was interested in being on the show. We're going to be pursuing that and see what's happening. But at least the ones I've heard about or run into, or our guests have described, just do not sound to me like tulpas. But it is theoretically possible. What say you, Ben?
Well, anything's really possible. So,
well, that's true, as we said in the beginning of the show.
Anything is indeed possible. So if that's...
But can you get Bigfoot to clean your pans in your kitchen? That because sort of combine the Harry Potter thing.
Oh, well, then it turns to Harry and the Hendersons over here.
That's going to be that's good. That's a good comment. It's going to be a classic. Okay, excellent. All right. How much time we have there, Mr. Producer?
We have about 5 minutes.
Okay. Got a quick one here. No.
Something relatively short.
Okay.
Well, we can talk about Harry and the Hendersons for a little bit.
I suppose. Well, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, because I don't want to start one and then not have the time to finish it. But yeah, well, with Harry and the Hendersons, well, that's I've only seen it once. It's a film in which this family's driving down a road, like someplace out west, and slams into a Bigfoot who's crossing the road, and he's incapacitated, and they stuff him into the car because they feel sorry for him and take him home, and he sort of is a nice fellow, although he fries their furniture and stuff because he's too big, that sort of thing. And that's essentially, I don't know if I've even seen the whole thing, but this fellow in Pennsylvania claims that he's been friendly with a family of Big Feet. They have a rudimentary relationship, and you don't think of Pennsylvania as being Bigfoot country, but apparently
everywhere
is.
Feet.
I know that according
to the BFRO, I think it's 1.25 miles there's a Bigfoot.
That's a lot of big feet.
Yes, I know.
Yeah. Well, they were here in Rhode Island filming. And, as a matter of fact, our friends Keith and Carl Johnson were involved in that particular show. And I remember they met in the East Greenwich Town Hall, very historic place. And they were, the team we're going to try to get them on the show, as a matter of fact. The team.
Oh, we are? We're actually going to do that?
I'm going to try it. Yeah, I'm going to try it. I haven't approached them yet, but I mean, why wouldn't they want to? Everybody wants to be on this show. You wouldn't believe the emails I get.
Everybody wants to be on this show. It's some of the
entitlement culture. Like if they're told that the subject is not really appropriate or we don't really have this kind of stuff on the show, some of them get irate as though they're entitled to be on the show.
Well, yeah,
what is that?
Well, that's just how people are nowadays. I mean, it's like, well, I have the right to be on the show. It's like, well, we own the show. Yeah, it's like we can decide who comes on and who doesn't come on.
Well, anyway, there we are. Yeah. So, that's something to look forward to. We'll see if we can't get that going. Okay, so I'll just remind you, BehindTheParanormal.com is our website. Check out future guests, past guests, and almost 400 podcasts, all free. And send them around to your brother-in-law, whatever. Send them to your friends. Do anything you want with them, except edit them. That's one thing we ask you not to do. Make us say silly things. Also, you can buy my books on the site.
You can say tulips for like 2 minutes.
Yes,
straight.
Exactly. Yes. Buy my books, and of course, Footsteps in the Attic, back in print. You can buy it again there. Subscribe to our newsletter, or become a reporter at the site if you wish. And I've already said that. So anyway, many thanks to our producer, Mr. Ben himself, who's been running the board the past few weeks, doing a fine job here at WOON.
Well, thank you.
And we'll see you next Monday, April 9th, here on WOON, 1240 a.m. and ONWorldwide.com, when Ben and I will welcome back prolific author and paranormal expert Rosemary Ellen Guiley for a discussion of those mysterious little people and what could be behind the persistent legends about them from all over the world.
Wow, it's been a long time since we've had her on.
Yeah, well, it's also, we kind of miss St. Patrick's Day, but what the hey.
Yeah. Oh, well. So on our regular CBS radio edition, so many R's in that sentence, on Sunday, April 8th, in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Seattle, we'll visit the Iroquois author and healer Michael Bastine and talk about Native Americans and the paranormal.
Something, believe it or not, we've never discussed on the show before. We leave you this evening with a quote from American author Henry Van Dyke. Be glad of life because it gives you the chance to love and to work and to play and to look up at the stars. Unquote.
Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we will see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.